Yeah. Well, thanks so much for having me, Jack. I'm really proud of the work that I've done in my first term, and I'm proud of how we've done it. I'm proud that we got a VA hospital in Garland that's going to help us better serve 184,000 veterans and create 5,000 jobs. And that was an important part of us passing the U.S.-Mexico-Canada trade agreement, which is really important for our economy here. And that I've stood up for our healthcare and tried to lower costs. And I'm proud of the way we've done it. We've done it while gaining support from across the spectrum, from the U.S. Chamber of Commerce endorsing me and the Dallas Morning News to labor unions like the AFL-CIO and SEIU. And this is my home. That's the place that gave me a chance to do the things that I've done, being raised here by a single mother who taught in our public schools. And I'd love to have the honor of continuing to represent this community.
Regarding the coronavirus, how would you rate the Trump administration's response to the pandemic?
Well, let's be very clear. It's no one's fault that COVID-19 came to the United States. It was going to come to us. It's a global pandemic. But I do think that it's been a failure of leadership that has led it to be this bad, that we are now 4% of the world's population, but 20% of the deaths, that we've lost over 220,000 Americans to this virus. We've had a very different response in the United States from other developed countries, and that is a failure of leadership. I mean, you remember the days this summer when we didn't have enough PPE to protect our frontline healthcare workers, when we didn't have enough testing here in our communities. That was all, I think, also a failure of leadership. But one of the things that I think was the biggest failure was not telling the American people the truth about how they could protect themselves. Even now, the most simple thing that the president could do is tell folks, wear a mask, practice social distancing, take care of each other. We're all in this together. And instead, he holds events where he makes fun of people who are wearing masks, where he encourages basically super spreader events. And, I just think that attitude has really made it so much harder for us to try and get this virus under control.
Do you also think that, when compared to other nations, the United States is different in the sense that it's not top down, usually, it's local up. And so do you think that that has played a role as well?
Well, I think we needed to have a national plan, a national strategy, because this is a virus where even if you do well in your community, let's say Dallas was doing great and locking down the virus and Houston was not, it would still come back to us. And so that's why you can't just have a regional approach. You can't just have a local approach. You need a national approach. And when you're talking about the testing supplies and PPE that we were discussing a second ago, these are international supply chains that a single state, or in the case of Dallas County, I worked very closely with Clay Jenkins as he was trying to get these materials. It's really beyond their ability to effectively do. That requires a national response. So yes, we have a federalist system in which we try to push power down and try to spread around the authority, and that's important. But when it comes to something like this, a pandemic, you need to have a national plan and strategy that's implemented and followed, and then tried to encourage the states and localities to follow it and to give them the resources they need to implement it. And that has never occurred.
Regarding the reopening of the national and the Texas economies, do you think it's open too much, not enough, or just right as we speak right now?
Well, as we speak now, obviously numbers are going up, and we're going to have to keep a close eye on that because the experts are telling us at UT Southwestern that we may be heading towards some big spikes in coming weeks. But we understand that we can keep our economy open if we take some really basic steps through mask wearing, through avoiding certain scenarios, through practicing social distancing. I certainly don't want to see us shut down the economy again. And we only should do that in the very worst of circumstances where the virus is completely out of control and we have no alternatives. But it is clear also that earlier this summer, when we were opening up the economy in Texas, that we were going before the guidelines from even the Trump administration guidelines. We went before those guidelines said we were ready. And we saw enormous spikes. We had 18 days in a row here in Dallas County of over 1,000 cases a day. And I had a lot of folks, unfortunately, who died as well. And so, it's a balancing act, and it always will be until we get a vaccine. But what we've seen in countries that have handled it better than us, Jack, is that they aggressively test and contact trace. They help folks quarantine and isolate. And even without a vaccine, countries like New Zealand have totally eradicated the virus in their communities through doing that. We're doing about 900,000 tests a day right now. We should be doing 4 million. We should be quadrupling that. We should be contact tracing much more aggressively. And we can do that, and I think we can implement that with the right leadership.
One other question just on the contact tracing, as far as these other countries are concerned. a lot of them, they were tracking people's cell phones and doing that. And do you think that would play well here in the U.S.?
Well, I think it'd be optional, and I think that you could opt into that. We can do it through other means, and I've called for this for months. You may have seen, for us to hire an army of contact tracers in the hundreds of thousands. This is what other countries have done, and you also try to hire people from these communities as well, and that's an important component that we don't talk about enough, to make sure that they can actually get responses and try and help folks understand that they've been exposed and that this is not a punishment, that we're trying to protect them. But the next part of that, Jack, that we often don't talk about is quarantining and isolating, because too often what we've seen is that when you have one positive case in a family, everyone in the family gets it. We saw that in the White House with the president and the first lady and even their son contracting the virus. That happens far too often because most folks can't effectively quarantine in their own house. Dallas County has started along with some plans to use vacant hotel rooms. This is something I called for months ago, is that we make these available to folks. We give them even a stipend like we would for jury duty because they are doing a service by helping us hold down the virus. It's an optional thing. They don't have to do it. But that's, I think, the way we do things in our country. We give folks the choice. And I think a lot of people would take advantage if they had the chance of knowing if they'd been exposed, because they want to know. And I think there would be some who would say, yeah, I'd like to have some notification.
Let me ask you about the initial $3.5 trillion HEROES Act that you voted for. That didn't go anywhere. Then the $2.2 trillion HEROES Act 2.0, which you approved, that didn't go anywhere. Now we see these negotiations between Speaker Pelosi and the Trump administration. Where are you on that? What would be a comfortable number for you?
Yeah. Well, I'm one of these folks who thinks that we need to get a deal, and that the number is less important to me than meeting as many of the needs as are out there as possible. And I've pushed very, very hard for particularly the airline industry, because, Jack, you know how important it is for us here with Southwest and American in North Texas, with Love and DFW being hubs for them and really important drivers of our economy. We tried twice in the last couple of weeks to pass an extension of the PSP program, which is the Paycheck Support Program that keeps the airline employees employed. We tried through HEROES Act 2.0, and then we tried again through a unanimous consent motion on the floor that the Republicans blocked. And, that for me is one of my top priorities. And so, we all have priorities around the country. Different members of Congress in different regions are going to have their own priorities. But, I think it's really critical that we help folks during this time, because we do not want to go into the holiday season where we know we're going to see higher numbers of COVID-19, where we're likely going to see parts of our economy continue to struggle very badly, and heading into the holiday season where folks are not able to gather, they can't get their kids Christmas presents. I mean, we have to have a deal before then. And so I've been encouraged by some of the recent stirrings that I've heard out of Washington about that. I'm a little bit discouraged when I hear Mitch McConnell say that he doesn't really care what we agree to with the White House, that he doesn't want to bring it up in the Senate, because people are hurting and they need help. And being raised by a single mother here, I know exactly what that's like, and I want to see what we can do to help.
Want to turn to the economy, and I know the Democratic presidential candidate Joe Biden has said he supports a $4 trillion tax increase on those who earn $400,000 or more, and he also wants to increase taxes on corporations. Do you think that's a good idea, considering where we are economically?
Well, first of all, the tax policy is set by the Congress. And so while every president comes in having plans of what they'd like to do, the Congress is going to be the ultimate decider of that and arbiter of that. And I think we will have to take a look at the conditions for the economy, the conditions on the ground, how things are looking, and make a determination. But most of what Joe Biden is talking about is returning to where we were before the Trump tax cuts that really placed so much emphasis on the very top, where 83 cents of every dollar went to the very, very top of earners in our economy and to the very biggest corporations. That was a very unfair, I think, tax deal. We needed a middle-class tax restructuring. We didn't get that. And I'm glad to see that Joe Biden is not talking about raising taxes on the middle class. But let's be very clear also, Jack. The most important thing that we can do for the economy is to defeat this virus. We are not going to recover economically until we get a handle on this virus. It's like we have a parking brake on the economy. And until we take that parking brake off, we're going to continue to struggle. And so that, I think, is the most important economic plan in many ways that Joe Biden has, is he has a very detailed plan about how we're going to crush this virus and get us back to work and get us back to being able to interact in as safely a manner as possible.
Would you support, if Joe Biden is elected and he does send a bill, to Congress, would you support, his plan to increase taxes on the wealthy and on corporations?
Well, just like with every bill that comes before us, I'll have to see what the implications are. We get scores from the Congressional Budget Office and all the data around what it's going to do and what the long-term implications are. That's something that with the Republican tax cut in 2017, they didn't even wait to find out what the CBO score was on their tax bill. It's like buying a house before you even know the price. And so I think we're going to have to take a deep look at this, because we also have to recognize that we have a real issue with our deficit coming up, and that we need to address that. And it's probably going to be addressed from multiple different directions. And so we're going to have to make some tough choices. What I promise to the folks here in North Texas is that I will always be open and transparent about what I'm thinking and the direction that I want to go in. I've tried to do that throughout my first term. We've held 25 town halls where I answer questions. Every time there's a major issue, put out as much information as we possibly can, so folks are not in the dark about what I'm thinking, because I think that's ultimately the job of a representative, is to, whatever decision you make sure you're accountable to the folks who sent you there to do it.
Regarding health care, how concerned are you that the Supreme Court will declare the Affordable Care Act unconstitutional?
Well, unfortunately, I think there's a decent chance, especially if the judge who's being considered is placed on the court. She has written previously that she thinks the decision by John Roberts previously was incorrectly decided. And so with her vote, that would be enough to repeal the entirety of the Affordable Care Act. Now, the grounds that they would repeal it on, I think, would allow us to re-implement it just with some adjustments. And that, I think, is where we have to be thinking is what's next. Because we've heard for over a decade from the Republicans that they want to repeal and replace, but there's never been a replace. I mean, I think that they're starting to even admit that there's no plan to replace it, just now saying, well, we'll try and keep the protections for pre-existing conditions. But you protect pre-existing conditions by a structure of a law like the ACA, in which you require there to be no discrimination against someone with a pre-existing condition. And there are a lot of other provisions that are really important for folks, and people are relying on now. I talk to people all the time whose kids stay on their health insurance through college all the way up to their 26. That's obviously an ACA provision. We require them to cover things like maternal care, which we know we need to have done. My wife and I just had a baby. We're having another one in March. We want to make sure people are getting that coverage. And the expansion of Medicaid, which we need to do here in Texas, is giving 20 million Americans access to health insurance. In a pandemic is the exact time that you don't want to be taking away people's health care. We have, unfortunately, right now, about a third of Texans under 65 who don't have health insurance. We have to address this. It's a huge problem for us. It's going to lead to enormous problems, not only in terms of our health of our community, but also your tax rates are going to go up. Your property taxes are going to go up, because we're going to deal with this through the way we always do at Parkland, at the county level. And I think that's not only not the right thing to do, I think it's not the smart thing to do.
Do you support policing reform? And if so, what would part of your plan include?
Well, yeah. I mean, I think, listen, I'm a supporter of our police. I think that they have a very tough job, and that we ask them to do far too much, because we're asking them to cover, like we do with teachers. My mom was a teacher. We ask them to cover all of the sins of our society that we're not dealing with, from mental health to addiction problems. And so, but yes, clearly we've seen not only this summer, but for years now, that there need to be some smart changes. And to be honest with you, Jack, some of the things we've already done here in Dallas, like banning chokeholds at the Dallas Police Department, are things that need to have a national spread. And so we've passed legislation in the House called the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act to try and lay out what we think national reform could look like. It includes things like having a registry for officers who have been had misconduct claims against them, banning chokeholds, banning no-knock warrants, increasing training for anti-discrimination training, increasing funding for body cameras and the storage of body camera footage, so that both for the police's sake, so they can have a record of what happened, and for the public's sake, so that we know what happened in any given incident. But a lot of this is done at the local level too, and I want to really stress that. I mean, the Congress, what we're looking at is, what are we doing at the national level to try and provide funding for what they're going to do at the state and local level? And so we have to work together at every level of government to try and restore the relationship between police and our communities of color, because in many places it is broken. And if we don't fix it, it makes us less secure.
One other question, Congressman, and that is, this race is considered likely Democratic by the Cook Political Report. What exactly are you doing to keep it that way?
Well, it's funny, Jack. I'm an old athlete. I don't count anything until the final second is off the clock. And I also believe that I really believe this, that I want to earn every single vote that I get. And so we have an army of folks, as we did in 2018, who you saw out there knocking on doors in 2018. Well, now, they're making phone calls. They're sending texts. They're having conversations themselves to help us get out the vote. And you've seen record numbers during our early voting period. And to be honest with you, that's not accidental. We had record numbers in 2018 as well, and it also wasn't accidental. There's been a lot of hard work that's gone into organizing our community. But really, it's not just my campaign, and this is one of the things that I am so thankful for, is that there are so many groups who have formed themselves, and they're led by women almost unanimously. They decided that they're going to give themselves a name after the 2016 election. They started organizing. They started getting their friends together. They had candidates come speak to them. They decided to block walk and do all these things. And those groups and those folks are the ones who are changing our politics, and who I think are going to also hold accountable office holders going forward. I think it's good for our democracy, and I hope and I think that we're going to have record turnout in this election.
Congressman Colin Allred, thank you so much for your time. Really appreciate it. All the best to you.
Thanks so much, Jack. Take care.
Cruising down the road, got the hammer down. Tell all your friends this is Cowboys Town.